Good afternoon, and welcome to this public meeting of the United States Consumer Product Safety Commission. We have one item on the agenda this afternoon. CPSC staff will brief the Commission on the fiscal year 2018 operating plan. The CPSC staff members briefing us today are, and it's Ms. Monica Summit, Deputy Executive Director of Operations and Support, Mr. Dwayne Ray, Deputy Executive Director, Safety Operations, and Mr. Jay Hoffman, Director of Office of Financial Management. Thank you all for being here and for your willingness to brief the Commission, as well as to you and to all the staff for the work that has gone into this document and that is before the Commission today. At the conclusion of staff's briefing, we will turn to questions from the Commissioners, and those rounds will last 5 minutes each and will continue until the Commissioners have asked all of their questions. We will now begin with a staff briefing. You may proceed.
Good afternoon, Acting Chairman and Commissioners. My name is Monica Summit, and I am the Deputy Executive Director for Operations Support. Thank you very much for the opportunity to brief you today on the Consumer Product Safety Commission's Fiscal Year 2018 Operating Plan, which was provided to you electronically and in hard copy on August 30th. Joining me today, as you said earlier, is the Deputy Executive Director for Safety Operations, Dwayne Ray, and Jay Hoffman, the Chief Financial Officer. In addition, there are key programmatic executive staff available to answer any questions. First of all, I'd like to provide you a brief summary of the operating plan process. In formulating the operating plan process, the CPSC considered a broad range of inputs, including input from stakeholders, from the public, and from individual commissioners. At the time of drafting the operating plan, the fiscal year 2018 budget was not enacted. Since then, the Congress has approved a short-term continuing resolution through December 8th, providing CPSC an annual funding level of $123.8 million. The operating plan is based on the Consumer Product Safety Commission's fiscal year 2018 President's Budget request level of $123 million. Program offices will receive a funding allocation in line with the President's Budget request of $123 million, which is a $3 million decrease from the fiscal year 2017 enacted level, which we will discuss further on slide 7. The fiscal year 2018 mid-year process, which is usually during the springtime, will be used as a tool to amend and align the operating plan to make it consistent with the fiscal year full appropriation level. The operating plan is a key implementation plan to the agency's strategic plan. Therefore, program offices provided priority activities aligning with the current strategic plan. Appendix B of the operating plan describes more specific priorities linked to the current strategic plan, which is the 2016 through the 2020. The revised draft fiscal year 2018 through 2022 strategic plan has not been approved. Any changes to the current strategic plan affecting the implementation plan will be reflected in the fiscal year 2019 operating plan. As previously mentioned, the operating plan considers the agency's strategic plan as well as its performance budget request. And specifically, the strategic goals for the current strategic plan are as follows. Strategic Goal 1, Workforce. Cultivate the most effective consumer product safety workforce. Strategic Goal 2, Prevention. Prevent hazardous products from reaching consumers. Strategic Goal 3, Response. Respond quickly to address hazardous consumer products both in the marketplace and with consumers. Strategic Goal 4, Communication. Communicate useful information quickly and effectively to better inform decisions. And CPSC's budget priorities are as follows. Focus on risk. Focus resources on the highest priority consumer product safety risks. Import surveillance. Continue to support import surveillance by incrementally developing the risk assessment method system to identify and stop non-compliant imported products. Outreach and education. Emphasize outreach and education by engaging all stakeholders through forums and workshops. Data-driven. Expand the sources and types of data analysis used to identify hazards and inform compliance decisions. The following 2 slides will give you a brief description of the operating plan, of its contents. The first page talks about the summary of change between the fiscal year 2017 enacted and the fiscal year 2018 operating plan. The next page talks about the funding and FTE levels. Pages 3 and 4 are key outcome measures and the description of them and those that are externally reported and the progress of them compared to the strategic plan objectives. Pages 6 through 9 are proposed voluntary and mandatory activities, standards activities charts. Next slide. The remaining portion of the operating plan is more detailed and specific to each organization, including a funding and FTE chart, including performance measures, the annual milestones, operating plan measures, and an overview and priority activities. As mentioned earlier, this slide talks a little bit more about the change from fiscal year 2017 enacted to the fiscal year 2018 budget request. The change is a decrease in $3 million, of which $1.3 million is for the Virginia Graham-Baker Act grants, which we did not request in the fiscal year 2018 budget. 1.7 to the salaries and expenses account to adjust for the January 2017 hiring freeze. Also to note, in fiscal year 2017, the appropriation included $1.3 million for the Virginia Graham-Baker Acts. Therefore, a total of $1.5 million is expected to be obligated in fiscal 2018. And that is all that I have for you today, and we are prepared to answer any questions.
Thank you. Do either of the other 2 witnesses have anything to present, or just open it up to questions of the Commission? Okay. So at this point, the Commissioners will have the opportunity to ask questions of staff, and I will begin the round of questioning myself. So I'd like to talk a little bit about what occurred here last week and what may occur going forward, and that is we had last week a public hearing on organohalogens, and this week coming up we have a decisional meeting on organohalogens, and I have a couple questions with regards to the ops plan and going forward in terms of resources. My first question is, what is the projection in the current FY18 ops plan for work on organohalogen flame retardants?
Chairman, as we developed this operating plan, we did not plan for work in this fiscal year for that petition at this point. Staff's recommendation was to deny the petition, but assuming we got different direction, we'd have to adjust the operating plan for that.
Okay. So the other questions I have may be they may be hypothetical. And I'm not sure if Dr. Borlase is, if you have the answers to these questions, or Mr. Ray. My next question is, are we going to coordinate any work or activity with the EPA regarding organohalogens?
We'll certainly coordinate with the direction from the Commission based on Wednesday's decisional. I think process-wise, based on the commission, direction from the commission, we'd go back, identify resource needs, and then the commission then would have to determine if they were going to, resource the organohalogens work, identify offsets for work that we would not do in order to resource organohalogens.
Thank you. If the petition is not granted, is there any work at all? I think Dwayne answered this question already. Is there any work planned in 18 regarding organohalogens? If the petition's not granted?
If not granted, not on organohalogens specifically, no.
Flame retardants?
Flame retardants, yes, as part of the effort we have with chemical voluntary standards. We do have work planned in 18 on flame retardants, specifically in children's products. This is a follow-on with work Health Sciences and others have done the last couple years, looking at what flame retardants are in children's products, characterization of them, and even work on how they may migrate out. Work has previously been done by staff looking at if it's due to like a simulated sweat or urine, what comes out of the product.
Thank you. To any one of the staff at the table, if the petition is granted, do we have any idea in terms of resources, what it would take for this agency?
We haven't put any resource estimates yet because we were waiting to see what the specific direction from the commission would be.
Okay, thank you. So one of my questions, and I want to make just to talk a little bit about this, the commission last year had the opportunity to advance TB 117 as a national standard, and we chose not to do that. Can you just describe for me, in this ops plan, what kind of work staff is working on pursuant to the ops plan for 18?
Sure. The work staff has proposed from EXHR and the 18 op plan really follows from the direction the commission provided in the 17 op plan. The overarching strategy from the EXHR staff is, regardless of which stakeholder group, Bear Hefty, et cetera, that we're working with, how do we find a way working with them to balance the chemical safety and the fire safety? The work internally we've done on barriers, trying to see, is there a way to do both? The discussion so far has been an either-or discussion. Is there a way to kind of try and do it as both? Whether it's, so the work in 18 on that strategy is continuing to work with Bear Hefty based on the direction from staff in 17, and also a number of the voluntary standard organizations, be it ASTM or NFPA.
Thank you very much. My time is winding down, so Commissioner Adler.
Thank you. Oh, it does work. So one quick question. How much have we built into the budget for the in this op plan for phthalate work? And how much did we spend last year on phthalates? Roughly?
Well,
You go ahead.
going in reverse order, we'll have to pull up the exact numbers of how much. I would say it was definitely all of the time that we had allocated for phthalates, but we can get the exact numbers for 17. And for 18, with the decisional plan for next month, we do not have time allocated for phthalates, specifically the rulemaking in 18.
Okay. I did want to say that the budget, as usual, is a very well done document, and I was going through it and comparing this year's op plan to last year's op plan and writing down all the numbers, and then I saw you actually had put in a page that saved me all that work, but I didn't realize that until the end. But I do want to thank you for doing that because it helps to go through the analysis of the op plan a whole lot better. And as I was just looking through the numbers, for the most part, we're keeping the same goals or trying to do better, and I thought that was, for the most part, a really excellent approach. So I'm looking at page 23 of the op plan with respect to compliance, and this is an ongoing concern I have, but if you look at the row that says percentage of fast-track cases with corrective actions initiated within 20 business days. My question always is 20 business days of what? Because I think this is a figure that is a lot more loose than we say. And one of the concerns I've always had about fast track is that when you talk to people outside the agency, they shake their heads and say fast track ain't fast. And I do think that it may be run as efficiently and expeditiously as it possibly could, but I even think sometimes the term is a little bit of a mislabel, and I would still like to have a more accurate number as to the number of days between somebody contacting us and the initiation of a corrective action plan, because I'm certain it's a lot more than 20 business days. And I'm sorry, I just drew a complete blank when I looked at the recall effectiveness rate for all consumer product recalls is 25%. Could somebody explain to me what that encompasses? Does that encompass, for example, goods that are in inventory, not yet distributed to consumers? Does it anticipate things where consumers throw the product away, but they don't actually take it back for a refund or for some kind of corrective action?
It anticipates all parts of the supply chain. So if there are products stopped in inventory and never reach consumers' hands, that's counted in the overall recall effectiveness rate.
And when we issue these recall effectiveness rates, do we break down where the products are caught, like X number in inventory, X number from consumers?
We do. In the monthly progress reports, it'll break out where the corrections are in the process.
Okay, and then another issue, and I would appreciate if somebody could explain this to me. I see that on page 33 we list 18 days for the period between the time that a first draft of a press release is issued and the actual issuance of a recall press release for the timeliest 90% of recall press releases. And so I'm wondering, how do we determine which are the timeliest 90%?
Thank you for the question, Commissioner. We don't include recall alerts. We just include regular recall press releases. And then for the timeliest, it's by number of days. So between the first draft and the posting date, we look at the 90% of those. The ones that have the most days are in that 10%, which are removed.
And then this number of business days between the establishment of the first draft and the issuance of the recall press release, is that all internal, or does that encompass internal deliberations plus going to the company and saying, we've revised it from the first draft and we'd like to do it this way as opposed to that way? It includes both, or just the internal?
It includes both CPSC internal and communications with companies who are negotiating the wording of press releases with our staff.
Okay. One other question I have, and this goes back to another one of, I'm just run out of time.
Thank you. Commissioner Robinson?
Thank you. There are a number of performance measures that were in last year's operating plan that had baseline on them, and instead of a specific target, and many of these now have specific targets, but they don't all have specific targets. So could you tell me what the process was of coming up with these target numbers? And obviously I'll have some questions about those that haven't yet been filled out.
Well, I can address the process issue anyway.
Okay.
So what we normally do when there's a new performance measure, not all of the data sources are at hand, so what we do is we work with the program offices to make sure that we have good, solid data. What is our experience with that data, and try to set a realistic target, not something that's too easy or too hard. For this point in the process, the measures that have a target assigned, we feel like that we've got a pretty good handle on it. We have something that we could report. For those that are still labeled baseline, I couldn't tell you where specifically we're at in the process. I could get back to you, but we certainly, by the time the budget gets issued in February, we'd like to have a target for each of those.
So are the numbers that are filled out for the baseline that now have numbers, are those the actual numbers of 2017, were based on 2017 numbers, which I appreciate. We're not quite at the end of the fiscal year. But are we setting a higher goal than what we actually we achieved in 2017?
So it may or may not have anything to do with the actual result in 2017, but it's more the latter in your statement. It's based on empirical data that we have at hand, and then the target is supposed to be set in a manner that is certainly achievable, but not so easy that it can be met halfway through the year.
So there are two places in the key performance measures in the fiscal year 2018 targets that are to be determined, and they were baseline last year. One of them is the percent of consumer product-related incident reports warranting follow-up actions and violation rate of targeted repeat offenders. Does anyone know why those are still TBD?
I think we're going to have to get back to you on that. That's my.
I don't have the information, but I'd be happy to get back to you with that.
Okay. What are we going to look at for that? I mean, who's responsible, like, for the percentage of incident reports warranting follow-up action? Is that EXHR?
Well, I believe the second one is import, and yes, it's EXHR for the first one.
For warranting follow-up? Okay. And then the second one's import?
Yes. It's in the the third column,
Right.
lead office.
Right. Okay. On page 7, I just wanted to make sure I'm clear on what we're doing with batteries, because we've said that batteries, button, lithium cell will not be worked on, but we have 2 new battery projects. The batteries, fire and battery ingestion, were those the same thing we were working on before, and they've just been broken down, or how did that happen?
Correct. We just split them up to address the 2 different hazards, fire from the rechargeable high energy density batteries, and then separately children ingestion of the button cell batteries.
Okay, so I have had a relatively recent update from our lab people on ingestion, but what are you anticipating in those 2 areas, Dr. Borlace, that we'll accomplish this year?
For the fires related to high energy density batteries, we're going to complete execution of the funding that we received at mid-year in terms of building up the capacity at the lab. On the other front related to voluntary standards, we have 2 things going on. One is voluntary standards efforts related to that, working with UL, IEEE, and others. The second piece of it is enhanced training. For example, just this week, we had Doug Lee at a major battery industry trade show giving a presentation on battery safety. So we plan on that front doing both training and education so that people in the design phase, if you will, are putting in batteries where they account for the cell, the battery pack, and the system that it goes in.
Okay, and all of that's in the high density area, right?
Yes, ma'am. And
With
then
respect to the ingestion, it sounded like we'd sort of hit a stone wall on that, frankly.
a bit, but we do continue to work with the voluntary standard and the industry on things like they have made improvements to packaging, et cetera, trying to get that across the industry. Also, warnings, some of them are now putting the warnings on the battery itself with a little pictogram, continuing to work with them on that.
Okay. I'm out of time.
Thank you, Commissioner Kay.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just wanted to thank the staff for the great work for the operating plan. I obviously have a bunch of questions that I've submitted to you for answers. So at this time, I'll just wait until those answers are given back to my office, and we can continue the dialogue then. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Commissioner Mohorovic.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. And thank you also, staff, for your answers to the questions that I've submitted previously. I do want to get on to a subject about our proposed work with upholstered furniture in the voluntary standards arena. I spoke without being completely prepared about NFPA 277. I believe that voluntary standards work would fall under, in page 7, under the voluntary standards work, item number 45, upholstered furniture. That's correct. Mr. Borlace, I think either you or Mr. Ray, could you provide a little bit of the following in terms of a general plain English brief description of NFPA 277, the hazard that the standard attempts to mitigate, and any insight that you might have in terms of where the committee is with regards to finalization. And I appreciated always reading the Voluntary Standards Activities Report, but I thought you might want to do that as it came up last week, and I wanted to hear it first from the experts as I attempted to describe that, but I think we'd all appreciate hearing it from you.
I'll try plain language as best I can. So NFPA 277 is for NFPA, which is the Standards Development Organization, a volunteer standard they're developing on open flame. So they have NFPA 260 smoldering, 277 open flame. They do have two task groups. There's what they call a primary task group that's looking at a test method, and then a broader secondary task group. The primary task group is looking at a test method that is based on TB 133, which is California's open flame standard for commercial furniture. So that has been from the primary task group. It did go to the secondary task group. They met in May on it. I know there are a lot of comments on this approach in terms of NFPA starting with a California's commercial furniture standard to look at open flame on residential furniture, and those discussions are still ongoing. So I believe that's where the NFPA 277 process is right now.
Okay. In terms of the hazard that the standard is attempting to address, in our federal rulemaking, when we talk about cigarette smoldering, it's about the cigarette being the first item, that being the source of the heat, right, with the furniture being the first item ignited. In NFPA 277, with a large open flame standard as opposed to the open rulemaking that we have for a mandatory rule, which is a small open flame, which I think is attempting to imitate either a cigarette lighter or matches being applied to upholstered furniture. In NFPA 277, is it a small open flame to simulate that kind of hazard scenario, or is it in fact the scenario of a large open flame where there's already a fire in the house, and then the furniture, the performance standard that the standards body is attempting to come up with, is it to try to mitigate the hazard, the potential for that upholstered furniture to contribute to a fire that's already ongoing, as opposed to the first item ignited?
With respect to whether it's considered like a small open flame or a large open flame, I will just have to get back to you on like that specific character.
That's pretty technical, I recognize.
And sometimes how they're defining it is really dependent on how they're comparing it to other flame sources. So we can get back to you on, what they're proposing so far as the flame source. For TB 277, that is part of the discussion, is what should the open flame source look like? For what they propose from 133, that would be one, but there's some other ones. And then also for the flame source that's applied, what should be the performance requirements to meet? One issue with using a office furniture standard, for example, is would you allow a higher heat release because you're counting on a sprinkler system,
I see.
which you would find in an office building, which you wouldn't find in a residential building. So there's that sort of dynamic going on.
But in terms of the scenario that the committee is attempting to address, have they determined whether or not they're trying to mitigate somebody, probably children, obviously, playing with matches or playing with lighters and lighting upholstered furniture on fire, or is it in fact the other, which would be trying to imitate a fire that's already underway, and that the upholstered furniture wouldn't contribute?
Well, I believe it's the latter. We'll get back to you on the specifics.
Thank you.
Thank you. We'll start our second round of questions. One of the challenges that our agency faces is getting out ahead of emerging hazards and especially technologies. I'd like to talk a little bit about the Internet of Things, and most of the Commission offices, I think all of the Commission offices had meetings from RELA a couple weeks back, and they raised this issue with us. I think it's a very real problem that we're going to be encountering, and I'd like to hear from staff whether we have anything planned or we're thinking in terms of how to fund that, in perhaps what do you see as CPSC's role in this Internet of Things as we go forward?
From EXHR, we have had one or two presentations where we've done discussions on Internet of Things. From our perspective, when we're looking at Internet of Things, we're looking at two hazards. The first is with Internet of Things, you have a smart product. The product later on is not the same product it was when the person buys it. So if you have a software update that introduces a hazard that wasn't there before, say you have a life safety device like a smoke alarm, it's kind of the easiest example, where due to a software change, they accidentally change the algorithm with which it can detect fire so that it's not as good as it was before. That's one issue. And then the second issue is really kind of communication issue where could it block communication of a life safety device with something else to not alarm when it should, et cetera. So that's how EXHR is looking at it. In terms of plans for 18, we have been doing outreach to the public on it. We've worked with international programs on looking at international events, et cetera, to get the conversation started. We recognize right now when it comes to the Internet of Things, the privacy issue and the security issue is still first and foremost. But as soon as they really get that resolved, we do see these safety issues, right behind it that would then be coming to the fore.
I would like to add, at least from the international team, they are working to try to get out early coordination amongst other parties, because this is all very new before everybody gets kind of set into their approach, but trying to get a unified approach to identify the issues and how can we come together to make sure it's a great technology but doesn't create a hazard that is unanticipated.
Are there any intergovernmental groups that are working on this issue together? Are we a part of it? Do we know?
I mean, I definitely know we're on the international front working with that. Beyond Rich and his team's efforts, I'm not familiar with additional efforts at this point.
Thank you. I do think it was within this fiscal year, there was an issue with a smoke detector that was more a software issue and something that the company could fix. Are we looking at this from a compliance point of view? Because this will change the way we do things as well, in terms of a fix that we really, it can be handled internally and it can be handled very quickly.
Sure. I think we've seen both sides of that. One, from the recall side, to be able to warn and stop the use of a recall product, but two, being able to cure or repair a recall product. That's if there's a software piece like you mentioned in the detector that can fix the problem. That's really and it's much more effective that way when you can actually get to the device and correct it.
Thank you. I have one question for OCM, and it's a very brief, quick question. Does the 1.4 in OCM's budget, in their campaign budget, include funding for Anchor It?
We have reworked the money that we're spending in certain campaigns. So our plan would be to fund Anchor It with the $1.4 million and reduce the Pool Safely campaign budget.
Thank you. I'm guessing the rest of the commissioners would be interested to know what the Pool Safely budget will be reduced to.
Pool Safely budget, our target is $750,000.
Thank you very much. Commissioner Adler?
Testing, 1, 2, 3. It works. Wonderful. So I have just a couple of questions. I notice on page 7 under voluntary standards, we still have furnaces CO sensors listed as a project, which is just fine. My impression is that's going absolutely nowhere with the industry. And so I'm wondering, what in your minds would it take to move that, at least to add it as an additional mandatory standards activity? Would it take a vote of the commission to direct staff to put it in the mandatory standards activity listing?
Well, I think what staff proposed was short of that, but clearly a vote would direct us to do that. I think there one thing we would have to consider any offsetting resources on that, but we'd be prepared to review that if that was a proposal.
Okay, I certainly appreciate that, and I certainly intend to raise it. With respect to, again, on page 9 under mandatory standards, we've done the conspicuity on ATVs, and could you just remind me what we are doing on ATVs other? Does that include contract dollars, and does that include studying the issues that were raised before, for example, stability of ATVs?
Yes.
Thank you. And then one last question. I wasn't entirely clear, and just following up on what Commissioner Mohorovic said, under the mandatory standards summary table, we have this thing called upholstered furniture. Does that include our study of further testing on smoldering and open flame, or is that studying open flame, small open flame, and large open flame? What is that listing?
The DATR work in upholstered furniture for 18 is the continued technical work based on the 08 NPR, but for staff's direction on the work we're looking at, it's still related to barriers. Again, is there a way to kind of address both the fire and the chemical issue? This is a continuation of work that we've done the last year or two, where we've used contract dollars to purchase a number of different configurations of upholstered chairs, different fabrics, different possible barrier technologies, and run them through their paces, if you will, both smoldering and open flame.
And is it both small open flame and large open flame, or is that what you're going to have to get back to us on?
Yes, we've been using one flame configuration, so it's been the smoldering with the cigarette and then the one flame configuration.
Yeah, I know about that one. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Commissioner Robinson?
I noticed in the key performance measure summary that we have decreased the planned candidates for rulemaking by a third. We're down from 23 to 15. Could someone explain to me why the reduction in the planned rulemaking?
I think a lot of that is we're getting to the end of the 104 rulemakings, which accounted for, just account-wise, the number of rulemakings there. So we're kind of coming to the end of that cycle with regards to the quantity of rulemakings that were there.
So does that account for all 8 of the reduced?
I haven't counted them all in front of me, but happy to go back over those.
I'd appreciate it, because I'd
sure,
like to
no
know
problem.
what is off it. And so this means that I assume there are resources that are freed up to address other issues and topics. And can somebody address what resources are freed up now that we're decreasing the rulemaking by a third?
From EXHR's perspective, we do have resources freed up by fewer. Also point out in the 18 operating plan, we have a reduction in FTE. So some of the resources that got freed up, from say rulemaking, were then absorbed by the FTE change. We did pivot some of our resources to some of the other projects and the continued voluntary standard work.
Okay, so I assume you've got some time, though, that we could allocate to something else.
All of EXHR staff time is fully allocated in the operating plan that we brought to the commission. So there's not like a bucket necessarily of just, free time that's not in any way.
But you don't know how the third reduction resulted? What we did with all those extra resources?
No, we
freed up?
have it laid out. It's just it becomes distributed amongst the different projects that make up, for example, within EXHR. EXHR is part of the operating plan. So it's not,
understand, but
they don't all
that's-
go to one place. in
That's
other words.
extremely general. Could we get a little bit more specific on where those resources went or are going?
In terms of changes, We've put more resources on some of the emerging hazard work this year. That's
Which
one
emerging
place.
hazards?
We do have additional staff on batteries, for example, this year.
Which section of batteries?
The lithium rechargeable
The
high energy density
High
batteries.
intensity? Okay. What else?
We do have a plan to increase the collaboration and outreach this year. So, for example, both time and travel money to travel to some additional either like seminars or industry
Could you
meetings.
give me a little more specificity?
Sure. I used the example just before of battery safety, the battery conference that we sent one of our staff to last week. We're looking at opportunities, not just consumer electronics show, but things like there's actually a consumer electronics sensor show that we think would be a good opportunity for staff to go to talk about some of the emerging hazard issues we're facing and engage with the public there.
So this is collaboration with the public or industry or other government agencies, or what collaboration?
It would
is
be
this?
collaboration with industry, mainly at these industry trade shows.
Anything else we're putting that third reduction of resources into? Besides the emerging hazards of high-density batteries and the collaboration with industry on batteries?
I mean, we can put together a list of what increased and decreased. I'm just trying to identify, because like I said, the staff that was working on it, a lot of it from the technical staff, then they work on other projects, but there's not just one project that they then go to. It gets distributed across EXHR to a number of different projects.
Okay. This is another EXHR question on page 11. One of the priority activities, in fact, the top priority activity is to improve the data analytic capabilities by expanding the use of advanced analysis software tools, server SAS, text mining, and pattern recognition. Can you just tell me what is envisioned in that first number one priority? So it sounds interesting, but I just don't know exactly what's envisioned.
We're envisioning completing the migration over to server SAS. So, for example, we have server SAS in that it is installed, and we now have staff that are gaining familiarity with these new capabilities. So in 2018, we anticipate staff finishing the transition over to server SAS and getting up to speed on it.
Okay. I assume that it's more than that since it's more expansive, but I'm out of time, so I'll finish up later.
Thank you. Commissioner Kaye?
Nothing. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Commissioner Mohorovic?
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Members of the panel, I wanted to find out a little bit more about the funding that's envisioned in the plan for the Anchor It campaign. When I was looking for it and I saw it identified in different parts of the communication strategy, I couldn't necessarily find out exactly what was the expected funding for the campaign, and however you might want to describe that, whether in relation to a previous year or I know in other times we've talked about this publicly, we talk about it in terms of funding into the rest of the fiscal year, however you want to be able to describe it, but could you let me know what the intentions are with regards to the Anchor It campaign, however you want to describe it?
Why don't I start, and Patty, if you want to add on how you're going to contract it, that would be fine. So what we did, Commissioner, was we consolidated all of the campaigns into a single line item to make it easier, quite frankly, for OCM to execute. The envisioned funding for FY 2018 is $400,000, which funds 12 months of performance. So what we'll do is we'll work with OCM, the OCM team, to try to establish a contract that takes us through a full 12 months, as opposed to the incremental strategy that we've talked to you about the last couple of operating plan meetings.
I see. Before we get on to a better description from Ms. Davis, I appreciate that. So in the past with the operating plan, we haven't fully funded it. We've funded it almost partially, and then at mid-year, I think every mid-year, we've addressed it so that we had the funding throughout the fiscal year. This would be the first time that we're expected to be having it fully funded, if that's... And
yes, I would go a step further. I don't recall a time that it's been funded in the operating plan. I think this is the first time that we've funded it at the start of the fiscal year. In previous iterations of this, it's been funded as a mid-year item or an unexecuted. So this should add some stability to the campaign so long as the Commission sees value to it.
Thank you, Mr. Hoffman. And Ms. Davis, in terms of if in fact the agency moves forward with the funding as planned for the Anchor campaign, how do you imagine that the stability and the certainty, as Mr. Hoffman said, would be treated by our partners, our contractors that are working on the campaign, as well as planned staff time?
Yeah, the certainty is a great thing. We do have a contract request out now with that's had various bidders, and we are looking for a public relations campaign to be done by a public relations contractor. We would focus on, as we have in the past, outreach, events, new videos, social media, and looking to make an impact.
Thank you. Mr. Hoffman, this is a specific one if you need to get back with me, I understand. In the past, through all of our methods in checking the seat cushions for change, et cetera, have we been funding it at approximately $400,000 a year?
Yes.
Yes. Thank you very much. No further questions, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Excuse me. I do not have any other questions. Commissioner Adler?
No further questions.
I have a number of other questions. Shall I just go?
Proceed.
Okay. Mr. Borlace, or Dr. Borlace, you were in the middle of telling us about the first priority, and we didn't talk about text mining or pattern recognition, and Mr. Rolfes is in the back, and maybe he wants to address it. I don't know. But that was the number one priority, so I wondered what we had in mind with text mining and pattern recognition.
So within EPI, we've also been looking at ways that we can use text mining and pattern recognition as part of our predictive modeling effort. We're trying to link the reports that are coming in with then disposition to come up with some predictive modeling, i.e. if we've seen patterns in the past that lead to certain, say, a compliance action. If we see those patterns in the future, can we identify those to say, hey, this might be something that we need to take a closer look at immediately in order to, based on the results of the past?
And is that something being done in-house?
Correct, yes.
And what text are we mining?
So far, the text has been in CPS RMS, the text that we've been using, so the collection of different injury data sources.
Okay, and in the second priority, you have improved richness of EXHR's data collection by enhancing the functionality and utility of consumer product-related emergency department treating information collected through NICE. And I'm delighted to see that you're looking at statistical modeling of the NICE data with data from the Census Bureau and HCUP, and you have designated a small area estimation and expanding fields captured in the NICE data. Again, are we doing that in-house?
Some of it is being done under contract with funding that's been provided at mid-year as we get it. And this would also capture, for example, PC NICE, which was a mid-year item that was funded by the Commission.
Well, what would it be capturing? Because this is obviously now several months later. In the op plan, that's different than what we captured in the mid-year.
Well, this is the execution. So,
Okay.
this is the execution of the mid-year.
Okay, so we had a number of witnesses who talked about these very things at the data hearing a long time ago. And there were several witnesses who certainly seemed, both from agencies and outside agencies, who seemed to be very willing to help. Have you considered, or are we using any of those people?
Using
in meeting
them
this
for
goal?
In meeting the goal, not in any different way than we had been doing like in the past couple years. So we clearly have, when it comes to NICE, our partnerships and with CDC and the other agencies where we're collecting the injury data for them. We've got the outreach with the Child Death Review Board.
Yeah, I'm just wondering, because we had a lot of witnesses, went to a lot of trouble and took a lot of energy from the agency to put the data hearing together. Is that something that we're using for this priority?
Yes, but even in this priority, we had to prioritize the NICE data before we prioritized like alternate data sources.
I don't know what that means.
So that means from the data hearing, when we took all the information that we got from it together, we prioritized internally what we could start with, and we decided that we would start with the NICE data and any improvements to NICE before we looked at the other recommendations that people had coming out of the data hearing.
Okay, but we're statistically modeling that with the Census Bureau data and the, I don't know if it's HCUP or HCUP.
Correct. You mean with respect to the small area modeling?
Right.
And correct.
Right.
That was from the 2017 mid-year, yes.
Okay, one of the things that a lot of witnesses at the data hearing talked about was how important it would be for us to include the outcome field in our NICE data. Are we considering that, and how complex it would be? Or don't you know?
I don't know.
Okay, could you, I assume we're going to have a private briefing at
Yes.
some point, so maybe we can address that. The focus on preventing hazards by collaborating with business and stakeholders through training and seminars to better design safety into consumer products from the outset is another priority. What specific activities do you have planned for collaborating with business and stakeholders? And I assume by stakeholders you mean industry, not consumers? Or do you mean others?
All of them.
Okay. So you're going to train consumer groups?
They are certainly invited to all of it. When we looked at this one, we, I think, had a phrase in there about design for safety. So from a prevention perspective, where we're coming from is the best way to have a safe product is to have it designed from the outset. Clearly, I think what we've seen even from the rechargeable high energy density batteries is there's a pretty wide area there that we can fill in terms of helping people understand, this is especially for non-regulated products, what are best practices, what are the industry best practices even, or other observed best practices for things. We had a training just this week that focused on it with respect to mechanical hazards, where EXHR staff went with international program staff to Asia to talk about what are we seeing from mechanical hazards, and how can you address them, things like pinch points, et cetera.
So is one of the things we're doing is coming up with the best practices? Is that one of the products that we expect to see out of this?
Not as a specific CPSC deliverable, but the real deliverable here, I think, is getting out from CPSC out to other places, out to other meetings with other groups to talk about what we're seeing, and to try and provide some of that input for them, so that give them information that they should be considering and evaluating as they're designing new products.
So is this goal that we have stated here, I mean, it's very general, and I'm just trying to get a handle on what we're envisioning this. Is this just simply, are people going to seminars? Or do we have some deliverable in-house that we're going to try to get that's a little more?
The former.
Just going to seminars?
Correct.
So do we have any measurement of going to these seminars that you're going to use to judge success? I mean, how do you measure progress in this goal of preventing hazards by collaborating with business?
Well, admittedly, it's a pretty difficult thing to measure in that, in terms of trying to measure the design for safety, but so we don't have a strong measurable goal on it.
On the project summaries, let me get that in front of me. It's I didn't see anything about you mentioned SCDR, but I didn't see anything about the pilot project, which you and I have discussed ad nauseum for more than a year, that I was hoping would get started. We had 5 states that we were supposed to be getting started on, and then hopefully expand that, as I understood it, if it worked, since that's such a rich data source that we haven't been using. But I don't see any mention of it at all. Why not?
Just EPI, and especially data systems, and Mr. Schrader is the division director, has it to work with them. He's reached out to him since we've gotten the cleared joint letter, and it's not in here just from it's very much a detail, and so the only reason it's not in there is because of the level of detail associated with that specific effort.
I'm not sure what that means,
That
because
means,
you and I have talked about, I mean, what we were trying to do is find a way to get permission from these states so that we could get more detailed information, so that we could plug into that rich data source of the way that children under 18 die in each of our states. And we had this group that was going to work with us, I think it was a year and a half ago, that we tried to get this moving, and we still haven't apparently contacted the 5 states. But do we have, I guess my question is, do we have a pilot program that we envision, or have we just given up on that data source?
We do. The time is in the operating plan for that effort in 18.
And where is that? Because I didn't see it.
It's planned, we just didn't include that specific reference.
And have you evaluated what, if this is successful in the 5 states, what we can do about expanding it, since we have that data available to us from 48 states, presumably, if it's available from the 5?
I think we're going to make sure we get the results from the 5 states first.
So are we anticipating that it'll be op plan for the year 2019 before we think about expanding it, or don't you think it'll take that many resources to expand it, or what do you think?
I think when EPI has the results from the 5, they'll come up with a plan for expanding it, and based on the timing, it's something we'd bring up either at mid-year or something we'd bring up in the 19 operating plan.
Yeah, I mean, my concern is that, as I've said so many times, I know if it's not in the op plan and you need to get it done, it won't get done if it's not in the op plan, and this isn't in the op plan. So I just wonder if we meet with the success I anticipate, as I have for the last 18 months, if we meet with the success of getting that data from 5 states and can expand it, then somebody who will be bringing this up will be met with, but it's not in the op plan, so we don't have the resources. So I'm just wondering what we can do about that to make sure that we can do that.
Right. So the time for the 5 is in the op plan, and when EPI comes up with based on the results, comes up with a plan to expand it, we'll bring it to the commission, and if that's at mid-year, we'll bring it up at mid-year, and if it's for the 19 op plan, we'll bring it up then.
So it's not stated in the op plan, but where is it in the op plan?
It would be under one of the EPI MIS codes, and one of the first few MIS codes. I can get you which of the specific ones.
Okay, I would appreciate that. And carbon monoxide hazards. One of the things that I've been pushing for quite a while is to get the data that PGMA is using for their position that they're advocating that we should have shut-off mechanisms as opposed to reduced carbon monoxide emissions. And I believe, I don't know for sure, but I believe we've not received any of their data yet, and that could make a significant difference in terms of our efforts on the mandatory rule if we're able to evaluate that data and decide it is or is not supportive of the position they're taking. Is anybody pushing them on that?
Staff is continuing to talk to PGMA about it, and there's a PGMA webinar, I believe, either this week or next week, where PGMA has stated they'll be presenting a lot more of that data. So we expect to see what PGMA presents then and fill in any gaps. We do have some data that we received from individual companies from the tours that we've done. We visited 4 of the companies so far.
Right, I did the same thing. It's just that we didn't have the data, and it's been weeks ago that I was there, and we still don't have the data. So, I mean, it's been called into question. I understand it's by a competitor of the companies that we visited, but my point is that I don't know how staff can advise the commission, and it's a pretty huge number of resources that we have to devoted to making this into a mandatory rule if their data don't match up with their representations. Mm-hmm. So it seems to me pretty essential that we figure out when we're going to get their data. Not another webinar, because they've done a lot of those, but we haven't received the data. Are we pushing for the actual data so that our engineers can come to the commission and say, this looks really promising, or this does not look promising, so we need to go forward with mandatory rulemaking?
Yes, staff is pushing them at many levels from the engineers up.
Good. What is automated I'm looking at emerging hazards on page 13. What is automated pre-screening of incident reports that you're contemplating? This is It's in 13327. What does that mean? It's on the left-hand side of the page, about halfway down on page 13.
Well, that was the predictive modeling effort I referenced
That you were
earlier.
talking about? Okay. Page 20, I have a couple questions, and this is for compliance, but nobody's here from compliance, right?
I'll give it a shot.
In the 2017 OP plan, the priorities activity listed as number 2, conduct research on the submission of incident data from third-party platform and e-commerce websites. It's not in the 2018 plan, which I was puzzled by, since this is not only one of our biggest challenges, but it becomes bigger every day, and just wondered why that wasn't in the OP plan for 2018.
I'll have to get back to you on that.
Okay. You have 3, not you, but compliance. You have 3 activity areas related to improving accuracy and efficiency, casework process, and CAP monitoring. And I just wondered what specific steps are planned in those areas, and is there a specific work product that you hope to have as a result of those activities?
Which specific ones are you?
There are 3 activity areas, it says, that are related to improving accuracy and efficiency. So there's audit casework activities, that's number 3 under the priority activities. Review current process and identify opportunities to streamline efforts and ensure a consistent approach to product recalls, and review the CPSC corrective action monitoring plan. Those 3 are all together, and I wondered what specific steps are planned in those areas, and
so
if
these
there's a
are
work
about
product.
data quality issues.
I understand.
You know, one of those, clearly. The other is about process. Do we have good defined processes that we're working on? So we have some of that defined, but we're also looking to tighten that up and make sure we have folks trained and that they're executing to our procedures and processes correctly.
Okay, again, this is, your response is extremely general, as you know, and I'm just wondering what the work product is that you hope to have as a result of these activities, and how you're going to measure progress. Is that something Rob will have to respond to?
We can come back with you on exact
Okay.
work product.
Okay, and how progress is going to be measured. I would appreciate that.
Sure.
You have you have request firms to use enhanced notification to consumers. Do you have more specifics on what is going to be requested by compliance in asking firms to enhance notification to consumers?
Beyond our social media asks, those are the only specific ones I'm aware of.
And I guess a very important follow-up to that is whether these are requirements that we're going to make specifically in the CAPs. I'm a big lessons learned person, as you know, and it seems we've learned a great deal about the ways in which companies can play games with us when we don't make absolutely specific requirements in our CAP about communications, and then we're left in the position that the CAP's been approved and we're begging the company to do something that we assumed in good faith they would do anyway. So I'm wondering if this is part of what is envisioned with enhancing notification to consumers.
Yes, we would definitely want to be clear in our CAPs what the agreement is. We can't always get them to agree with everything we would like to, but we need to definitely make sure we understand what the company agreed to and what we agreed to.
And are there specific ways we're going to do that? Because that's a general statement that we've made for my 4 years I've been here, but we continue to have games played with us. And I don't know if anybody's making a lessons learned list with respect to the ways in which they play games if we don't say something specifically.
I think specifically is getting the terms in the CAP accept letters is where we can really nail it down.
I know that's true, but what are we doing to make sure that happens? Is that part of what's anticipated under this goal?
That is.
Is there any way we're going to measure improvement in this area?
I don't have a specific measure of improvement on CAP language, but we will work to try to give something that gives assurance that we're working to improve that area.
On page 24, there's 2018 OP90, it says number of recalls where social media was used to communicate a recall, and this is performance measure, and it says TBD, and I wondered why that is not 100% or close to 100%, and what is left to be determined about the number of recalls where we require social media to be used.
I'll have to get back to you on the other TBDs in this one also.
Okay. In the annual milestones, there's a participate in stakeholder workshop to address the importance of adhering to voluntary standards. Since that seems something that someone's attorney within companies would be telling them about, I wondered what we envision doing in the stakeholder workshop for industry.
Well, I think we had an idea from some lessons learned with laundry pods and our engagement with that, and I think that was somewhat envisioned in this milestone.
Okay, when you say with laundry pods, my understanding is that our primary goal there was coming up with a standard that they could comply with and then measuring whether that had gone far enough. But a shareholder workshop to address the importance of adhering to voluntary standards seems something quite different. So maybe you can help me out on what it is that's envisioned.
Yeah, we'll come back to you on that.
And if you could tell us why someone thinks that this is an area in which we should be spending our limited resources, I would appreciate it. There's also a workshop.
Apologize. I want to make sure that the other commissioners do not have any other questions, and then just get an idea of how many more questions that you might have. Commissioner Adler?
No more questions, thank you.
Commissioner Kay? Commissioner Mohorovic?
Only an apology for George. I was Dr. Borlase, sorry.
Thank you. Commissioner Robinson, can you give us an idea of how many more questions you have?
I've got a page and a half.
Okay.
But there's nobody here from import, and a lot of them are, I'm not sure why, but I assume Dr. Borlase will be answering those. Oh, sorry. Mr. Ray. So the next question is the workshop, there's listed a workshop conducted for the mattress industry, and what is this, if you know?
Yeah, that's the training to the mattress standard. You know, we do identify a lot of issues with both testing and certification to the standard, so it's an attempt to remedy those issues that we find through compliance programs.
So this is a training for industry on how to meet the voluntary standard?
No, it's a mandatory standard.
I'm sorry, on how to meet the mandatory standard?
Yes.
And we think that this is a problem because they're not meeting it?
We do find areas of noncompliance, and it's a very complex testing regime, and getting clarity on how the different parts of the rule work together.
So as opposed to compliance actions and recalls, we're going to do an education?
Those are still happening. So I don't want to, it's not a one or the other. It's in addition to that. It's, you know, if we were able to improve the level of compliance through education, that's helpful also.
Have we identified that that's the reason they're not complying, is because they don't know about it?
We do have situations where that is the case. I'm not saying we don't have non-compliant that knew the law. I'm just saying we have identified plenty of situations where folks aren't
Okay.
aware of the specifics.
Can somebody tell me how that was identified as the reason that we don't have compliance and why we should be spending our resources that way? I would appreciate it. You can
Sure.
get back to me.
Okay.
And then just a few questions. I guess I've got a few questions on import and then a couple on communications. The import budget's down $1 million, and the FTE number is down by 12, which was kind of interesting when I compared it to what the request was for the 2017 op plan. And I specifically would like to know how that is going to impact what EXIS is able to achieve this year. Is that something you'll need to get back to me on?
Let me at least give you the math.
Okay.
And then someone else can talk about the programmatics.
Okay.
So in terms of the FTE reduction, those aren't actual billets that were reduced. We had requested additional FTE in the prior year,
Right.
and Congress did not appropriate them. So there's not a downward slide in the overall programmatic level of effort. In terms of the $1 million specifically, we had allocated additional funding in the transition from the RAM 1.0 to 2.0.
Right.
That funding is no longer necessary. Plus, there was additional dollars to outfit the new 10 people that we were never appropriated for.
Right.
So that explains the $1 million.
So the request for the 10 additional was accompanied by an explanation of why we needed those additional people. I understand we didn't get them, but how are we envisioning that not having them and continuing it into 2018 is going to affect what EXIS can do?
Well, the specifics would have to be answered by EXIS, but those 10 people were envisioned for basically the next 10 priority ports on the list. I don't think it was exactly 10. I think it was 7.
Right, I think
but
that's right.
it would affect the percent of ports covered. As I recall, we were trying to reach either 68 or 70% of consumer product
Right.
lines covered, and so obviously we'll still be in the 60 to 62%.
Okay, and there's a priority activity of collaborating with and training partner federal agencies. Wondered what was anticipated there and where, and what other agencies were training besides CBP, which has been working with us for a lot of years and has abundant resources.
Yes, CBP is the primary folks that we
Okay.
collaborate with.
The performance measure and import of the number of import examinations, it's gone down to 35,000 from 40,000, and can somebody tell me why the reduction in the target numbers?
That just reflects not getting the total number of FTEs.
Additional people? And the percent of consumer product import entries that are at risk, our goal is 4%. Can somebody just get the lights up on what that exactly means, that we're at 4% as our goal for the consumer product import entries that are at risk that we're examining?
Yeah, this gets at what's getting scored through the RAM and some of our limitations on that.
Are we trying to improve that? It seems kind of low.
Yes, we are trying to improve that. Yeah. Yeah, regulated products is the
Sorry?
J.
I'll just speak for myself. I'm sorry. The reason it's so low is...
Dwayne loves talking for you.
I know. The reason it's so low is it's regulated products. So in order to drive this number up, we need to get into defects.
Gotcha, okay. And the number of ports where we're going to cross-train has dropped from 24 to 20. Again, is that because Congress didn't give us the 10 FTs?
Yes.
Okay, and just a couple questions for communications. There is, in the priority activities, an explore strategies to communicate and interact directly with most at-risk consumers, the micro-targeting strategies, and I'm just wondering if you've identified what communities you hope to reach through these strategies, and if you haven't identified them yet, how you're going to identify them.
We have not identified them yet. We do not have specific funding for micro-targeting. We're going to explore strategies to do that, to communicate with them directly. We'll be using our community outreach team, or they're called our core team, to lead this effort. And those 4 areas that our core team will focus on, so it will be one of these: safe to sleep, anchor it, pool safely, and poison prevention, including carbon monoxide. Of note, pool safely in fiscal 18 will be focusing more on the at-risk population of children, which are African American and Hispanic children, and drowning prevention in that arena. Kids, African Americans and Hispanic kids under 15 are 3 to 5 times more likely to drown than others. That's one area we'll be focusing on, but we haven't made exact plans yet.
I'm sorry, did I understand you? We don't have it in the budget?
We don't have specific funding for micro-targeting. I mean, what we usually do is spend our money on travel. We exhibit at various events, Urban League, Tom Joyner, La Raza. Another thing that could be very effective is paid social media promotion. We know that we can target people if we can use our social media accounts and basically do advertisements.
But then again, isn't in the operating plan? In
No,
your
it would be
budget.
come out of our regular funds.
Okay, but do you plan to do that with your regular funds?
We're not set yet on what we'll do.
Okay, and I know aside from identifying the communities that have the most injuries and deaths, there are ways to figure out what the best ways are to communicate, and I assume that isn't funded either.
The micro-targeting is not funded, but we're going to be looking at strategies, both from our state partners, our federal partners. What do they do? How do they do it? What does that cost? And we can use our operating funds to pursue that.
You think you have plenty of operating funds in this operating plan to head for the at-risk communities and communicate with them in the ways that are best? Are best designed to get to them?
Not a lot, but we'll do the best we can.
Any idea how much we have allocated to that?
No, not at this time.
Thank you. I have nothing more.
Thank you. If none of the other commissioners have any other questions, then I would again like to thank our presenters today, Dr. Borlace, Ms. Davis, Ms. Summit, Mr. Ray, and Mr. Hoffman. Thank you very much, and thanks to all of the staff for their preparation and their work in presenting the operating plan to us. The decisional hearing for the FY 2018 2018 operating plan will be on October 24th, 2015. This concludes this public meeting of the United States Consumer Product Safety Commission.